Okay folks, this is part 2 of a two-part video series I'm doing about this 3D maps feature in Excel using Little Rocky Run data from Fairfax County. So if you haven't seen it, if you're interested, part 1 just kind of takes a tour of how we can use this spreadsheet data and use the 3D maps feature in Excel to pretty much instantly visualize it on a map display like this, and to see it in different layers in ways that might be useful and informative to the way we're trying to use the data. So in this part, I'm just going to kind of back up a little bit and go over in a little bit more detail how you use this 3D Maps feature and how I have found its features and limitations so far. So this is a fairly recent addition to Microsoft Excel. I think it came out in the in the very beginning in around 2014 as a sort of limited release to people who are subscribed to kind of early adopter programs for Microsoft. It's now a mainstream and easy to find feature in Office 16 and maybe even sort of retrofitted versions of Office 13. So here in any given spreadsheet, if you go to the Insert tab, along the way you'll find that there's a map feature where you can kind of do fairly standard map charts, a 2D map chart. That's just a chart type. That's not the thing we're talking about. So here, for example, normally what Excel tries to do is says, oh, I see that your data is in Virginia, or I see that your data is in the United States, and it'll make you, a little snazzy map where it sort of overlays your data onto a chart type like that. So that's fine. In this case, what I used was 3D map. And when you go to 3D map, if your spreadsheet has any kind of location data in it whatsoever, and you start a 3D map, it will either start a new one or show you the ones that you've got associated with that spreadsheet already. So even though what it seems to do is to open another application, this looks like a whole different program. This is in fact just a component of Microsoft Excel. So anytime you save your spreadsheet, this map that you create and all the work you've done to create layers, filters, legends, etc., all that stays saved with your spreadsheet file. So there's nothing new you need to do in another application, nothing you need to do explicitly to link them, other than just take care of your data here. And as an aside, if you make changes to your data, you'll find that they're not instantly depicted in this map view, which probably a feature in some sense, that you don't automatically disrupt what you're doing on the map. But once you are done with some changes here in the spreadsheet, then if you just hit refresh data, then those changes show up here. So I find that works pretty straightforward. There are other things up here in these buttons that they either kind of work, or I'm not quite sure what you're supposed to do with them. You can create a video out of your tour. Indeed, they have this thing called a tour, and I don't really know what that is. If you look at this sort of tour editor, it appears to be some kind of like a time series you can do to kind of create a visualization moving through the map or something like that. I haven't quite figured out what that's good for yet. You can create a video, you can do a screen capture, etc. Right? So I noticed, for example, you can use this find location thing to at least get your map focused on an area pretty quickly. So that's okay, although it doesn't necessarily locate. Lost my mouse. Doesn't necessarily locate exactly where that is on the map. It just kind of centers the map on that place. There's also places where you can insert a 2D chart. So if I wanted to insert a chart based on Little Rocky Run, it'll sort of try to guess in some sense what I'm trying to do and put a chart in there. I have yet to see that 2D chart produces something I'm really impressed with, but it may depend on what data you have selected at the moment and what you wish to do with it. So how do you use this thing? So let's start with a fresh copy of this spreadsheet to see what it looks like to work with this from scratch. I'm going to open up the spreadsheet just as I downloaded it in the neighbor to neighbor group on Facebook. And so here it is. This was pulled out by a resident of Little Rocky Run who specializes in GIS. So he was able to pull out these nearly 2,400 records that record every address in Little Rocky Run neighborhoods and their various characteristics in terms of construction style, the model name of the home, the materials, information about renovations and basement type, and all sorts of things. So one thing to notice about this data is it is address information. So 3D maps can make use of any kind of data that is geographic in nature. So it looks for things like what country, what state, what county, even street level. And specific addresses can be extremely useful for this kind of data visualization. So notice here we've got the house number, what we call address number here, the street, the suffix, whether it be court, drive, street, whatever, and the city and zip. State's not explicitly mentioned here, but we can take care of that. So in order to map individual addresses, first thing we had to do to prepare the spreadsheet is to create another field in the spreadsheet that would concatenate that whole thing together into a valid street address. In order to do that, a really useful thing to do with any kind of table looking data like this is to in fact turn it into what Excel considers a table. In order to create the table, I'm going to select this whole thing, and I'm going to go to this button up here in the Home tab called Format as Table. You can pick any format you like if there's some particular color that appeals to you, but it doesn't really matter as long as you turn this thing to a table. It does have headers. Tables should, so you'll normally leave that checked. And so now this thing superficially looks different. You can see the rows are formatted in the visual way that I chose there, and that the headers look filterable and all that. If I go all the way to the end, this whole thing is formatted as a table. So it's not just superficially that this is important, but more important, Excel will treat this table as a kind of coherent whole now. So if I tab, let's see, I'm not going to be tabbing. If I go over the next column, it's currently outside the table, and type a new field name called address, because it's adjacent, Excel is going to pull that in as a new field in the table. And here's where I can make the magic happen. Remember, I wanted to combine these other bits over here, the number of the street, etc., into a coherent address that Excel's 3D map tools can handle. So I'm going to use a formula here, and you'll see how tables really help with this. If I type this open brace, I can see all the field names that are considered part of this table as little data entry options here. So now I can just put the address number. I'll close that brace. Now I'm going to do a little string concatenation trick here. Okay, so caveat here, this isn't going to be how to use Excel tutorial. The internet is loaded with great how to use Excel tutorials, and I highly recommend that you check those out and make yourself an Excel power user, because Excel is just really a fantastic tool, getting more powerful every year, as you can see here in this little demonstration here. So I'm going to be doing this little string concatenation trick here, putting a space between each thing often enough. I'm just going to copy this little bit so I can reuse it again and again. So I'm putting the number, the street, what normally comes next, oh, the suffix, right? So put that, put my little space in there, the city, put my little space in there. Now we don't have state, right? Remember, so we're going to fix that in a second. We'll put zip, and that should finish us up, right? So now we have what looks like a perfectly good address. But remember, we don't have state in there, and I really want that in for the purpose of the mapping tool. So I'm just going to go into that little empty space there, and I'm just going to stick Virginia in there manually for everyone. So here you can see one of the really great advantages of having this thing formatted as a table. I put the formula in there once. I didn't have to copy the formula down 2,400 times by holding and dragging or any of this other kind of business. Because it's part of the table will automatically complete and keep consistent the formulas that I put into the column. So that's done very easily for me. And so I'm just going to go ahead and save this copy of the spreadsheet. And that's all I need to do to the spreadsheet so that I can get started with the fun part, which is this 3D maps thing we're talking about. If you go to the Insert tab, notice here you've got this Maps thing that I mentioned before, and then 3D Maps. If you click Open 3D Maps, a new tour will open up. Here's Tour 1, and you normally start off with your data sort of unhelpfully kind of zoomed way out, and you zoom in, and I see this sort of really blobby looking thing. So this is where just a little bit of poking around in Excel will take you a long way. Okay, here we've opened up a layer. You can even see, things are kind of being progressively mapped on there. 2,400 different locations are being mapped on there. So eventually it's all going to fill in, right? And it's filling in on my new address field here. You see, it noticed that of the available location data that Excel could recognize as mappable, address was one of them, and it chose that one. I don't like the way it's looking though, and so when I poked around a bit, I figured out that in layer options you can change the size of the plots that are being used here. So if I go all the way down to like 0%, we're sort of at kind of pinpoint accuracy in terms of this map visualization. I have found just in playing around, I sort of like 5% is making this somewhat visible at the level I'm normally looking at it in, and you can change the color, whatever you're doing here. So you can change both the display aspects of what you're doing, and you can also change how things are being charted. So in our previous demo, you saw I had created different layers with different kinds of sort of filters and visualization choices so that I could use the layers in different ways. So I find it's useful. You always start with one starting layer as we have here. I find it useful to edit this and call it something. We can just call it Little Rocky Run. And so there's my Little Rocky Run layer, the addresses. And so anything you do within a layer is going to be confined to that layer. So if there are other kinds of data visualizations you want to do on top of this, suppose I want all these addresses to kind of show up underneath, and at the same time maybe I'd be interested in seeing something like we saw before, like zip codes. So if I were to create a new layer, call it zip code, whatever you want, and to have the data element for that to be zip code instead of address, well, now we should expect to see something at the zip code level. I'll zoom in on this, but this is a good place to point out that there's some annoying things that this data visualization thing does. One of the things is every time you put a new layer on, it zooms you out to like a world view again. You have to zoom back in. So there's little things like that that don't seem to be configurable in user options. So you just have to sort of play around with this and use it. So here you'll notice we defaulted to a column thing again. In the case of zip code, it's not pinpoint data plotting that I want to do for zip codes, but rather something like region, right? So this is a case where if Excel can recognize this as a region, a state, a zip code, that kind of thing, it can automatically color those in for us. Okay, so this is 3 zip codes shown in the same color, and in poking around you'll find that you can change the way this appears. For example, if you make zip code a distinguishing value, it'll use this kind of chosen color and in varying shades distinguish these zip codes a little bit more clearly for you. I found in the demonstration that you saw before, what I had done, instead of using value, I used category. And if you do category, what it'll do is color these, do a map color kind of selection here to distinguish the zip codes. And I find that visually a little bit more clear. So this is how you can work with layers and the options within the layers to work with these different data types without the work you do in one layer interfering with the other. I may wish to see my addresses mapped when I look at my zip codes or not, and I can use this visibility thing to turn on and off these layers. Notice I'm clicking these little eyeballs. If I click the eyeball, the show or hide button for Little Rocky Run, it makes the addresses go away or appear, and same thing, I can make the zip code go away if I just hide the visibility of that layer. So next let's take a look at how we can apply filters to make our data visualizations a little bit more revealing. So to do this, we'll add another layer. We messed with house styles, right, in the last demonstration, so let's create that layer of styles. So again, we zoomed out, so we'll zoom back in, and I'm going to go to my layer options. I'm going to make this be, I don't know, maybe my default size for now. And in styles, I'm going to go ahead and map addresses, but the thing I'd really be interested in seeing is what's the style description, this particular field, and I'm going to stick it in category so that I see a kind of plotting. This is an awkward way to look at it, these really tall skyscraper looking bar charts, but again, back to layer options. Instead of making the bars 100% or whatever, I'm going to make them as small as I can. If I go down to 0, I find I still have these bars. Okay, fine, and that's a good way to have them stand out. But now it's a little bit more manageable, and I can see that there's this distribution of different styles of homes within this neighborhood, and that there's clearly a dominant style, this sort of neutral looking color that was just sort of, I believe, arbitrarily chosen for the different categories, in which you can change down here. This, according to the legend, stands for 2-story, right? So notice we get a legend. It gives us already a nice little way to appreciate our data visually, and we can see the 2-story is the dominant style, and maybe that's interesting to visualize. Maybe at other times you'd want to kind of control for the dominant style and just see the outliers, see the anomalies, right? So in this case, in any given level, in addition to specifying the data, you can specify filters on that data. So if I add a new filter, again on the same field that's of interest to us, the style field, notice currently everything is being shown. And if instead I show only the 1.5 stories, they are shown in their chosen color, green. If I show the 1 stories, there they are. If I show 2-story plus attic, there they are. So I'm imagining, a case where somebody may be using this on something like an architectural review board or something like that, where they may, they have no doubt that if they wanted to see all the, a 2-story, they could just go out at random down any street and find a 2-story and take a picture of that thing or whatever they need to do. But if you're in search of something that's a more rare occurrence on the spreadsheet, something like in purple here we have 2-story plus attic. So how do these things look from the exterior when they're of one style or another? You can find on the map where they're distributed, where they appear to have been built, and where you can find them if you need to do survey them or do whatever. And once you've done this and you've kind of created a layer that you can work with, then anytime you interact with this layer, you can do the query that's particular to what you're trying to do. Hey, I'm looking for a split level with 3 levels. This rare unicorn house we have in the neighborhood. So it's either a unicorn or it's a data entry error, right? But assuming that if we're looking for a split level with 3 levels, well, here's the address where you'll find it, right? So what you might find that you prefer to do when you're saving a layer like this is have it display just the way you want it to. So maybe you'd wish these to be a little bit more prominent, since we're only showing the exceptions. They're not going to be crowded out by others. So if I unlock this chosen scale and I make the thickness of these bars a little thicker, then maybe that's visually a little bit more usable or more appealing. I can even play around with making other choices about how to show the data. Remember I told you blobs before, sometimes they're not so great. If I make the size of the blobs even smaller and make them less thick still, I could see where if this was a different kind of data, you might like to see the area in the neighborhood where there exists, say, a pool or something like that. But in this case, the blob look, or whatever they call this, bubble, that's not as useful to me as something like this. So that's a way you can change this. We could demonstrate this kind of thing one more time with something like the basement information. So if I've got a new layer here, I'll call this basement. Then we'll zoom back in and go to layer options, make the size not be obnoxious. And I'm also going to turn off my previous work in the other layer. Right, we're going to start working a new layer called basement. And in basement, what I'd like to do is take these basement descriptions, use that as a category. Whoa. Go back to layer options, make that not be as obnoxious. And here we seem to have a similar kind of phenomenon going on, where within the basement description we appear to have a dominant kind of basement, right? And it would be interesting to filter that information based on what we know about basements. And if we add a new filter, there are 2 different bits of data about basements: basement type description and basement description. So if we add basement description as a filter, under basement description, now I have a sense of what this means. It's a full basement, a 2/3 basement, sub and full, let's add this other filter. Basement description was one, and basement type description is this other one. So basement type is, does it have I guess windows or doors or whatever, provided a daylight basement. Sorry, I'm not architecturally savvy. A single well basement, a weld basement. So notice now, if we sort of take both of these filters off, there's all of our basements. And if I just filter on the 2/3 basements, when I filtered on that, these filter options automatically got reduced. So again, I'm going to go back to all. Here's all the different kinds of basement type descriptions. And if I focus just on 2/3 basements, then there are, of the 2/3 basements, there are a few here. And let's just make this more clear by doing that. There we go. Now we can see these 2/3 basements that have the following two kinds. So 2/3 basement that's daylight, and it looks like we have one, right? So that's interesting. So, we'll kind of go back to all of our things, and if we look at only full basements that are daylight basements, so we start to get, the ability to discriminate in our data. Here's full basements that are single weld or weld. And again, this could be, this is interesting and useful to somebody in some use case, right? And so, the key to this data visualization, to kind of just summarize this, the key to using these kinds of data visualizations always is to start with good data. So, if you have nice data available to you, as has been made available to us by the county and by enterprising people who work in GIS in our neighborhood and this sort of thing, then you've got the ability to unlock the potential of that data by doing these kinds of visualizations. And not only do you discover truths about your data by doing this visualization, but then you also, I find, you discover new questions to ask about your data. Wouldn't it be nice if I could slice it this way? Now that I realize I can spot anomalies in this way, that informs a new way that I might think about my work. So tell me what you think about that. Wherever you found this video, drop a comment in Facebook or on the website, in the blog. Let me know what you think, what you'd like to see next about this. And in coming projects, I've used this in some business specific ways, and I'll demonstrate how that can be used for that purpose as well. So as always, I appreciate any comments you have on this, and thanks for watching this video, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.